Hello, everybody. Welcome to another fun episode of NFA Talk. I'm Sheldon Clare, president of Canada's National Firearms Association, and I'm with my associate and lobbyist, Charles Zach. And our special guest tonight is the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, Tim Moen. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sheldon. You know, guys, I would have wore a tie today, but I actually had an interview earlier today, and I put my tie on, and my face got red. It was choking me. I don't know if it's the COVID-15 or something, yes. But my shirts aren't fitting around the neck anymore. So apologize.
Nobody's is.
Yeah, it's all tight. We're all stuffed shirts nowadays, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I should tell the listeners that what you do for a living outside of politics, you're actually a firefighter in Sherwood Park in Alberta. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm a firefighter. Well, man, I've been in emergency services for most of my adult life. So over 25 years, I've been a paramedic and a firefighter for about 22 of those years in an integrated service. So yeah, I've worked for an integrated service probably for the last 20 years, which means that sometimes I'm on an ambulance doing paramedic stuff, and sometimes I'm on the fire truck doing fire truck stuff. So
okay.
Yeah.
Multi-skilled. That's great. But we didn't come to talk about putting out fires, or maybe we did.
Government is a mindlessly destructive, chaotic force, just like fire is. So that's my crossover there.
Sure. So tell us about the Libertarian Party and where it's at, and how you're looking at upcoming elections, where you see the Libertarian Party being focused, and why the Libertarian Party should be something that firearms owners should look to.
Right. Well, we are admittedly a fringe party. We're small, and we are radical in that we adhere strictly to principles. We don't adjust our platform based on popularity. We're not chasing votes. We're trying to change culture. We're not trying to reflect culture by gathering votes. So we have kind of a different mission and idea about how it is that we get to a smaller government than mainstream parties do. Although I should put a caveat on, we're radical in that it sounds like our firearms policy isn't radical enough for you, Sheldon. So I'm hoping to get some of your, pick your brain a little bit and get some of your advice on how we can make it more principled and radical as we get further. But our primary mission, from my perspective, is to basically make more liberty lovers, to make people that understand and embrace the philosophy of liberty, because we think that government is downstream from culture, and so until our culture changes, we're not likely to see policy change in government. And we see this over and over. The government growth kind of slows down a little bit under the conservative government, but it doesn't actually stop, or it certainly doesn't recede. We could talk about this OIC and what we can expect under the conservative government. I don't expect O'Toole will be, he might repeal it slightly, or he might, throw in some legislation. But his goal is to get elected and to maintain power. And the only way to do that is to appeal to culture. And culture in Canada is very left-wing now. People are more scared of guns than ever, it seems. And until that changes, I don't think we're likely to see a change in government policy, even if we have well-intentioned conservatives in there that agree with us that we need more freedom. They're just not going to be able to do it because they're pragmatists. And that pragmatic part is they need to maintain power, and so they throw away their principles to get power, and then of course government grows. And so we're taking a completely different tact, where we say we'll trade away all the votes to make more libertarians. We just want more people that demand liberty or death, basically, and we hope that good things will come of that, because we see that as the only practical way forward, really.
Well, how do you make a significant change without having libertarian members of parliament? Like, how do you get there from here? Like, and I mean, I take your point about conservatives very closely. I mean, we were looking at the policy statement for a conservative candidate attempting to get a nomination. Charles was looking at it with me today, and his firearms platform is nothing short of offensive. It talks about banning all semi-automatics and this kind of thing. And this guy was running for the Conservatives. He's an Osgoode Hall law professor called Mark Johnson. And We have some serious concerns about someone who would purport to be a conservative and yet be engaged in radical gun control. We don't think our positions are radical at all, Tim, but we'll be happy to provide you with some suggestions. So anyway, how do you get there from here?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if I could get a seat in Parliament, that would be fantastic. That would certainly give me a bigger platform. You know, my political hero is Ron Paul, and he stood on that political stage. And when he ran for president, he woke up millions of people. He did a better job at spreading liberty in the past decade than anyone else that I can think of. And he shifted culture, I think. At least he certainly did more to make progress in that direction than anyone else I can think of, more than any other politician, more than any other podcaster, more than anyone. And so if I could get that stage, certainly I think I could do a lot with it. Now, the difference in the States, of course, is that Ron Paul could get a seat as a Republican and have that Republican machinery behind him and not have to worry about getting kicked out of caucus or getting kicked out of the party when he stood up and held Republicans' feet to the fire about central banking and military interventionism and ending the drug war and all these things that were blasphemy to the conservative Republican mind. He could get away with that because they didn't have the power to kick him out of caucus the way we do here in Canada, where if you go slightly against the party line, you find yourself on the outs. I mean, we saw this with Brent Rathgaber when he tried to introduce a private members bill, just to introduce a little bit of just a moderate amount of transparency, and it got hacked apart in committee, and he got told to remain quiet and kind of follow the party line and not rock the boat. And this was something he felt strongly about and passionately about, and he couldn't speak up in Parliament because he would get kicked out of caucus and essentially lose his seat in the party, and that would then ruin his chances of getting elected.
And all the perks that come with it, sure.
And all the perks that come with it. So if I thought there was a path to that followed Ron Paul's here in Canada, where I could get into a mainstream party like the Conservative Party and then be the type of radical that Ron Paul was in that party and bang the pulpit in Parliament, I would certainly consider taking that, but I don't think that's a possibility here in Canada. So the best that we can do is put out the message we put out, run as many candidates as we can so that as many Canadians as possible can hear our message and engage with our candidates who can communicate the message and answer their questions. And then we can look, and I kind of look at the Green Party as a model for how maybe we can get someone into Parliament, right? Elizabeth May was just a gadfly on the political scene, became kind of a media darling, and they ran a full slate of candidates, figured out which riding was most likely to go green, and then they dumped their war chest into that riding and got her elected. So I think that might be a potential strategy for getting a member of Parliament there. But we got a lot of work to do before we can even get there. So
I was talking with and Charles, maybe you want to jump in on this.
Actually, yeah, I just want to speak to Tim about this whole idea of the idea of liberty, and it's so true. Like, I mean, the culture out there has forgotten the definition of liberty. It's no longer being taught in the schools in terms of values and principles. It's all very authoritarian, central control centric, and that's the kind of mindset that a lot of our young are embracing now, right? So it's a cultural mindset that we're also pushing against. But I totally agree with you, Tim, that you need to have a platform where you can pontificate those ideas of freedom and responsibility, so that people don't forget this. Because as soon as we do, we're doomed. We're going to go further down that rabbit hole of further authoritarian central control. And I'm very entrenched with the conservatives, and I'm very libertarian minded. I've ran as a libertarian a couple times in provincial politics, and I see a lot of libertarians in the Conservative Party as well too. Mm-hmm. So we are around everywhere too, and I think sure. I hazard to guess that it's also in the Liberal camp and also the NDP camp as well too. That they're not all the Reds and the central controllers that they pretend to be. So we have to keep waving that flag of freedom out there so that it's not forgotten by people.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I'm glad that there are libertarians in these mainstream parties. I think that's a good thing. It's just that I think that the radicals are the ones that control the Overton window here in Canada and control what is said on that national debate stage when you see our leaders debating. The Green Party, the NDP, it's the radical voices in those parties, the ones that aren't afraid to shout, about critical race theory and social justice warriors and just be outright apologists for communists. Like, they're not even hiding it anymore.
No,
they've spread
even some conservatives. I've been appalled at some of the messaging I've been seeing in some conservative camps about no one left behind and these kinds of things, which really are basic Das Kapital Marxist tenements. It's, conservatives are supposed to be believing that everyone should have equal opportunity, but not equal outcome. Equal outcome is not conservative. That's socialist.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We saw, I remember in Edmonton here, there was some fury in the news when a conservative MP was wearing a shirt that said taxation is theft on a plane. Now, I take it that guy's a libertarian and maybe he's a little bit in the closet. He's got to maintain some decorum. He's a parliamentarian and he's got to stay within the confines of allowable political discourse. And so he kind of backpedaled and said, oh, it was just a conversation piece and a joke. And, but I know for a fact that he probably does think taxation is that guy's a libertarian. Otherwise he wouldn't be wearing that shirt. I don't mind that he's in there and doing that. My job is to make it so that he doesn't have to apologize for wearing that shirt. Exactly. To make that idea so popular, to be that radical that I'll take the hits. I'll be the unpopular guy. Someone's got to say this stuff. Someone's got to stand on that stage and get these ideas out into culture, or it won't happen. We won't get these liberties that we want, guys. And if you're trying to collect votes and play that political game, you're just impotent to get those ideas out there. But we do need those people to come behind us and fill that gap. Once we blaze that trail, we need people to walk that path.
Well, I think the issue is, of course, what people's tax dollars get spent on. And I mean, we're seeing an increasingly authoritarian style, not just in Canada, but also in our provinces. And it's in all the provinces about the current pandemic. This is certainly an issue. And we're one, you wonder what does this translate to in terms of the Firearms Act and firearms policies and maybe there are some reasons they're coming after our stuff. There's a relationship to all of this, and I think people need to be putting things into context and thus get a better understanding of what is happening in the world in a bigger picture, and not just think that any one of these things is happening in isolation, because they're not happening in isolation.
No. Tim, you alluded to this too. Sorry to jump in, but about the, sort of the move of power within the political parties and the structure itself of government. How over the course of a generation or two now, how the power has shifted to the executive. And there's constant party block voting, right, through whipping, right? And this is not the kind of democracy that we signed up for,
No.
And like Sheldon was saying, this is sliding more and more towards this authoritarian model. I mean, just look what, Trudeau said the other day about, this reset. I mean, that should be alarming to everybody.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's basically come out and said that he's going to exploit this national emergency, this pandemic, and he's going to go full. He's going to double down on his ideological march towards more authoritarian control. That was the message behind his reset comment.
Yeah, and I posted an article from these people from the World Economic Forum that are behind this Great Reset, and one of the articles was the year is 2030. Nobody owns anything and nobody has any privacy, and we couldn't be happier, or something like that.
And no guns.
Well, of course, that's part of the agenda, right?
Right.
But this is straight out of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, where
Exactly.
nobody even owns their own body, right? Like, you have to sacrifice your body to.
One of the things I really like about you, Tim, is that you're reasonably well read. even when we've had our disagreements, I know and I can respect that you actually have principles and you have some sort of a basis for your arguments. And I run into so many people that simply don't. And I'm glad of that, because we need that kind of informed debate in this country. Right now, nobody's taken a history class. Nobody reads literature and understands where we've come from to get to where we are.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, and you know what I was saying is, okay, so how does this affect gun rights? Because we're here talking in a gun rights organization. Well, of course, we know what the authoritarian agenda is. These people don't like guns, and you know, I haven't actually
they don't
gone in depth into this document, but I'm sure there's stuff in there about firearms and gun control. I would almost bet the house on that. And then we just look at the narrative around how we talk about COVID, right, and how you are a walking threat, whether you have tested, like, regardless of the fact that you haven't tested positive, that you have no symptoms whatsoever, you are an automatic threat just by virtue of breathing and walking out in public. You're a threat to people. And this is the kind of mentality that they bring to bear on legal and responsible firearms owners, that you're a threat, that we can't be too careful. You could turn on a dime and you could infect us with your bullets.
Yeah, that's Pam Damoff, Charlie's MP, who says that firearms owners are what's the quotation, Charlie?
We said that, or she said that she's heard a lot about law-abiding firearms owners until they're not. And
they're law-abiding until they're not. Exactly.
And the implication here is that you are guilty, and I have to prove my innocence, and I'm construed by the state as a walking national security threat.
Well, and that's
the real rub here about what she said, though, was that the people that are criminalizing us is not, you know, the people out there, but it's the state itself. They keep moving the bars of regulation and legislation further and further away, leaving us behind and criminalizing us in its wake. And that's really what she meant.
Well, and I had a conversation with a provincial politician recently, and I was talking to him about some aspects of this, and I said, you know, I've been through all of these different firearms control regimes where they've basically gone after things I own or want to own or have purchased and make use of. I've obeyed all their rules. I've followed all their laws. I've done everything I can to be a good, responsible citizen, and I'm done. I am so done with this nonsense. It does nothing for crime. It does nothing for public safety. All it does is create an ideological rift within society that is getting stark, is getting stronger, and it is not acceptable in a free society to be putting up with the kind of control regime that we are being faced with now. So I'm hoping the Libertarian Party has some solutions.
Well, I mean, this is what we've been fighting for, you know, over 40 years now. I'm not sure how much headway we're making. There's certainly more libertarians in the world than ever, but it does seem like there's a lot more authoritarians in the world at the same time, and they seem to be growing at a much faster rate than we are. Yeah, I mean, look, this line of thinking that you are an automatic danger to other people by virtue of, you know, you're no threat, but we don't trust you, right? This is, you know, it's undermining people's way of thinking. It's undermining the epistemology that lays the foundation for Western civilization. Exactly. You know, if you're a threat just by virtue of walking around peacefully, breathing the air, of course, it's not going to be a big stretch to see how that line of thinking can be applied even stronger to firearms and bolster arguments that they already make against firearms owners. It's not hard to see how this, how CERB and all these government handouts are going to be transferred over to a universal basic income program. It's not difficult to see you know, how the state is going to use this as a giant power grab and use it for their green agenda as well. But, you know, we've dramatically decreased carbon dioxide emissions over the past years. I can't imagine an environmentalist not jumping on that and saying, let's keep that up, people.
Well, it's a short walk. It's a short walk from this kind of authoritarian style to take people to camps. Like, next thing you know, you're being put in detention camps, and because of what you think or what you believe, or or your behavior in the public realm does not fit with a particular authoritarian degree, all of a sudden, all of these things are converging, and none of this is okay. None of this is okay in what's supposed to be a free and just society. And this is increasingly becoming a society in which we're seeing a lot of awfully compliant, sheep-like behavior and trust without critical thinking. I mean, I'm fine with taking responsibility and doing the right thing on critical analysis, right?
Yes.
But let's look at what exactly is going on here and make sure that what is being sold to us and told to us is actually going to stand up to scrutiny, and that maybe some of the people who are coming up with these policies and decisions have maybe taken a bit of a history class or understand the context of what they're doing in terms of ideology and politics and history, because I don't think they do. Or some of them that do are really, really evil and nefarious.
And of course, it comes down to people who seem on the surface to have good intentions, right? Don't you care about public health? You know, firearms are a threat to public health. You walking around as a threat to public health. Don't you care about the common good, comrade? And yeah, you know, I've read through my great grandfather's memoirs that his family fled Stalinist Russia, and in his memoirs, I mean, this is just a guy basically outlining his day-to-day life as communism came to power in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And, you know, he talks about, like, he was a Mennonite, and he talked about how this philosophy seemed like a good idea, very well intentioned, you know, to each according to their needs, from each according to their abilities, everyone sharing. I mean, this seemed to fit well with his Mennonite sensibilities of, yeah, we need to be generous and sharing and look after each other and look after our neighbor. And then, of course, they started demanding more and more from him, and the young people became ideologically possessed, and they're the ones that became the enforcers and came by with the guns and said, we need more. Your family's starving. Well, don't you care about the common good? And those good intentions were very quickly revealed to be not so good intentions. It was a mask for power. And you know, I can't help but see the similarities in what's happening now. We have all these people who are making these grand, intention. Don't you care about people? Aren't you considerate and kind citizen? Don't you care about the collective? And you know, they're ratcheting up the power, and so I don't think it's hyperbole when you are talking about camps and that sort of thing. I mean, we already know there's been some tenders put out there for quarantine camps, and it's not a hard stretch to see how those quarantine camps can become a little
exactly right. And I mean,
something else, but.
Like you, I'm a student of history, and I one of my favorite quotations, I was just looking it up, is by Benjamin Franklin, and I think everybody here knows where I'm going. And it's, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
Right.
That's Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin was no dummy. I mean, he would double the IQ of any room he walked into, and it's a real significant concern about freedom being taken away and being told that it's okay. It's about public safety. We've got this. Trust us. We know what we're doing. When it's pretty clear that there's quite a bit of divergence on opinion about various choices in public safety, including firearms and including what we're seeing now in this pandemic panic that seems to be going on and is being milked.
You know, it's interesting that the Americans, of course, you know, they've embraced the whole, you know, value and principles of liberty and freedom and everything else, and they enshrined, you know, certain rights into their constitution, you know, freedom of speech and freedom of movement, political, you know, freedom and that kind of thing, and private property, right? So I remember when I was writing the policy for the Ontario Libertarian Party way back when, that was kind of the central message in the policy, was that this is not about the guns per se. It's about whether or not the state has the ability and the right to confiscate your legal private property. And without private property protection, of course, and we're there now, freedom can't exist, because the state now has a way of getting into your life and intruding on your freedoms, and you can't fight that. So, to me, the future really needs to have private property entrenched in our Constitution. I know that's going to be a lot of work, but that's what needs to happen. Otherwise, we're going to continue down that slippery slope of authoritarian central control.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's one of our platform points is to, is we need to rewrite the Constitution. It's a bit of a hodgepodge right now. It's pretty weak in a lot of areas, and it needs property rights in it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is about property rights, and I have a confession for you guys. This is a little embarrassing for me. I grew up with guns. I was a hunter. I take firearm safety course, put my kids through all that stuff, but I don't actually own any firearms. I'm not really a gunny. I don't, I'm not a hobbyist. It's something that I feel emasculated by. Like, I feel like I should have guns. I feel like I want to have guns and I want to take it, but I just haven't bothered to yet. I guess I just don't feel strongly enough about it. But yet I get out there and I fight strongly for gun rights.
Well, you need to feel strongly about it, whether you have any or not.
Right. But this is my point. Like, I'm fighting. I feel so passionately about this, just like I feel passionately about, that people should be able to partake of, put whatever they want into their own body. It's their body, right? I mean, if we don't have this fundamental right, it erodes everything for everyone else. And one of the things I often, and so I think this puts me in a good position actually to argue and debate this subject with gun grabbers, because they can't characterize me or dismiss me that easily, because I actually came a little bit from the left. As a young man, I got leftist media on TV, and the idea of limiting guns and all that kind of thing, that sounded fair to me. I don't want to see a bunch of shootings and a bunch of violence and all that stuff. And then I changed my mind over time as I learned about philosophy and I learned about the actual evidence and all these kinds of things. And I developed a philosophical framework to view the world through. And I changed my mind. So I tell people why I changed my mind. And I said, look, violence concerns me greatly. Gun violence concerns me greatly. And everything government does, what's that?
It's not gun violence. And
right. Violence.
The term sends me, because violence is something that is perpetuated by people who wish to engage violent behavior. The tool that they use, if any, whether it be their fists or a baseball bat, a hammer, a rock, or a bow and arrow or a firearm, is secondary to their intent. Right.
But here's what I do. Here's the rhetorical device I use. I use my interlocutors' language and assumptions against them. I say, okay, you care strongly about gun violence. You hate gun violence. Why would you institutionalize gun violence? Why would you ask the government to do gun violence on your behalf? Don't you realize that everything the government does is gun violence, whether it's enforcing a minimum wage or grabbing guns? That's got to be done and enforced by guys with guns pointed at people if they disobey, and they have to pull the trigger if those people defend themselves from that enforcement. So just because I like a mugger robbing a woman in the park who says he has a gun on him, or maybe points a gun, and the woman hands over the wallet, okay, there was no physical violence there, but we still call that violence. There's a threat, an imminent threat of gun violence, and just because it looked, you could call it a peaceful transaction if you want. If you were observing it from afar, she hands over a wallet. There was no fist thrown. There was no bullets shot, but we call that gun violence. There's a threat of violence that is coercive physical force, and that's what government uses, and they will pull the trigger if you try to defend yourself from that and disobey. And so if you care about gun violence, you can't institutionalize it. You can't send out a mandate for guys to use guns against peaceful people. And so I like to use their language against them. I do the same thing with climate catastrophe. Rather than debating whether there's a climate catastrophe happening, I say, if climate catastrophe is on its way, that means we need liberty more than ever right now, because that's the only solution. Liberty, to me, is the solution to almost everything. And that's the only way we can create solutions, is in an environment on a substrate of liberty.
It's interesting you said that about having a monopoly of firearms at the government level and the security forces. I mean, the the 1995 Firearms Act was more or less built on that whole premise. I mean, there's a classic quote out there from Alan Rock, who's the author of that, infamous legislation, that said that he came to Ottawa to make sure that only the army and the government security forces have firearms, meaning that he was marching towards wholesale civil disarmament in Canada. So
they've never backed off from that.
No, that is still the case now, right? But once again, this comes back to the private property issue, right? Because we don't have those protections. The government can now pick and choose what it wants to take from its citizens. We live in Ontario. We've gone through this with the last Liberal government. I mean, they were trying to take away wood-burning fireplaces, shaming me for having a gas-burning car, because, certain ideological things that they would put into place, and they had the power to confiscate this, my private property through legislation. And like you said, there was nobody knocking down my door, but it was violence, because if I do say no, eventually they will roll up on my driveway and take me in handcuffs at the point of a gun.
Yeah, the only thing stopping the violence is your utter compliance with them, right? If you just disobeyed and refused to, comply, and then defended yourself from their aggression, the guns would come out, and you'd see very quickly. I mean, for anyone who doesn't believe me that government is violence, there's a simple experiment you can try. Just break any law that doesn't hurt anyone else. Throw lawn darts around your yard or something.
Firearms Act.
Yeah, like the Firearms Act.
Exactly.
And then advertise that fact to government and see if they are just making suggestions, or if the guns come out. When the guns come out, point back and say, "Don't you dare," because they're not going to back down. These are mandatory because they have guns.
I'd be careful about the pointing back thing, because that doesn't tend to go well.
Right. Well, that's my point. This experiment will not go well. I mean, but if you don't believe me that government uses guns to enforce their fiat, then you can try that experiment and see how it turns out for you. I wouldn't recommend it.
Tim, you don't have to go that far. This happens all the time. We have cases all the time with members and fellow firearms owners in the community who find themselves in the pickle, with the Firearms Act. And that's the first thing that happens, right? Because they're firearms owners.
Right.
The police know this, right?
Yeah.
And they don't come knocking on your door, with Mr. and Mrs. Joe Constable. They're rolling up on your driveway with a tank, and they're lining up on your door with the SWAT team, right? And they're making the place safe because they know that you are a firearms owner. And like I said, this is right out of 1984, right? So,
I said to a police officer one time that I was having a discussion with about this very thing, about why did they need to have information about who owned firearms? And he said, well, when we go on a call to a home, it's good for us to know if there are firearms present. And I said, if the computer says that there are no firearms present, do you change your procedures? Do you change your what you do or how you do it? He goes, well, no. And I said, exactly. So what about knowing who has firearms changes your behavior? Do you become more aggressive because you know there's firearms there? Is pulling your sidearm a priority? Because the idea that you're going to have a different procedure is a very dangerous one for a police officer. I think. I mean, I was involved with training emergency response teams back in the 90s for a little while. Very superficially. I take them to the range, did some field tactics and that sort of thing. And the thing that was hammered into them is they had drills, and they practice drills so that they don't get too caught up in making mistakes, right? You have a way of doing things that works.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like us in firefighting. When we go to an alarms call, we gear up like it's the real deal. And, there's been a couple times in my career where we haven't done that because it's the fourth false alarm of the night. And you walk into an apartment fire and you're like, oh, crap, I don't have my gear and I'm not well protected. And I just shit the bed. And so, it's exactly the same thing. You have to be vigilant on every call and use the same approach, or you're going to get bit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it makes no sense to claim that it's better for police to know this, that, or the other. The only reason for licensing is to create a list of firearms owners for control purposes. The only reason for registration is to compile a list of firearms for confiscation day. And the only reason for classification is to increasingly take away categories of firearms from the use of the general firearms owning public. That's it. The threefold ways.
Absolutely. And of course, as a libertarian, I think we have all too many laws that make people criminals for victimless things. And we're asking the police to constantly use threats of violence to enforce these laws. It doesn't just put the public at risk, it also puts the police at risk. So one can understand why they might get a little antsy about their safety. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to see them go into unsafe situations, and we could start by not making everyone a bad guy and not sending cops after what are basically innocent people.
And that's really the driving force behind what we're seeing today. I mean, if you remember the Mayerthorpe massacre way back when those unfortunate RCMP officers were gunned down by that criminal, right? Mm-hmm. Shortly after that, or actually preceding that, the police were your regular police, and they weren't militarized per se. But right after that, when the report was finished, you saw an escalation of militarization of state security forces, especially the police. I mean, the police I see now in the street, they look paramilitary to me. They're not the police that I grew up with. I had police all around me, and they looked like they were in their nice little suits, and they were part of the citizenry, and they didn't look ominous or threatening in any way. I mean, they were one of us. Now
they're all armored up, more barriers.
Body armor, and they've got, like I said, Halton here has tanks. I see them rappelling off the bridge all the time. I mean, what is this?
Right? Yeah, they're hammers, and to a hammer, everything's a nail, right? And it used to be, you're right, like it was, and I see this as in my profession as well, because we do a lot of things with police, and we'll be on a scene of someone who's having mental health issues, and maybe they attempted suicide, or maybe there's they're having a psychotic break and they're ramped right up, and we're calming them down. Just as we're getting them de-escalated, just as we're on the verge of getting voluntary compliance from them, the police come in the door and things ramp right up, and the force gets pulled, and batons and pepper spray and cuffs, and no firearms, luckily so far, in my personal experience, but you could see how that could happen very quickly, because they are looking to use force. They're trained to use force. They're really good at using force. But, we seem to have lost that de-escalation thing. I don't know if it's because, in the past, there was a fairly high bar for RCMP. I remember you had to maybe have some college degree and some life experience. Whereas now I think the standards are maybe, a little bit lower or something like that. I don't know what exactly it is, but it does seem that there has been a shift in mentality when it comes to policing.
Well, it's basically the strategy that's changed. And like I pointed out, after Mayerthorpe, there was a huge change in strategy and tactics of the police. They were not going to be caught short again and be ambushed like the way they were. So now they come in with overwhelming force and subdue the situation, even if it's, unjust violence that they're perpetrating on the people.
And Mayerthorpe is a classic example of what I was talking about. You check the firearms registry, and it says this guy doesn't have any firearms, and so it leads to, I think it can lead to a mental relaxation and a de-stressing of preparedness. You have to expect you're going to run into trouble in any call.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. Yeah, I can't imagine, if I'm a police officer and I see that the house I'm going to has a gun, that's going to be the thing on my mind the whole time I'm approaching. Exactly. It's not, hey, neighbor, how's it going? It's not like, it's just, I'm going to be amped right up.
And I think the way you pointed out, it changes the outcome. I mean, we're far from anti-police. Right? The police have a very important role. We have lots of members who are police officers or retired police officers in our organization. We have a ton of respect for the things they have to put up on a daily basis, and the nonsense that they're getting foisted upon them with this defund the police crap.
Yeah.
Which isn't helpful to actually investigating real crime. But where we have an issue is where funding is being used to go after people like us who aren't engaged in criminal activity or would prefer not to be, but are increasingly being pushed that way by a more and more authoritarian legal framework by a government of very suspect motive.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the police, again, they're the enforcement arm of the government, and, they're doing their job. And it's the government I blame here that is putting them in harm's way and putting the public in harm's way more than the police officers. And I know a lot of really great police officers as well who do de-escalate, who do bring things down, who talk reasonably, who don't automatically try to overwhelm with force. But there has been a perceptible change over the years. And as government grows, police do become, they're asked to enforce more, and those interactions put them at odds with the public, and then it becomes us versus them. In our minds, the police become the enemy. In the police minds, the public becomes an enemy, and everyone becomes a suspect, and that wedge is driven between, and that can never be a good mix. And then you add in there defund the police. So now we have a force that has been calibrated to use overwhelming force rather than maybe de-escalation. And then you pull the rug right out from under them altogether and say, well, no, we're not going to enforce anything. And those are both bad options. What we'd like to see maybe
help make things worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember we had a similar conversation at our AGM in Quebec City in 2015. I think you were one of our guest speakers there.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, it was a fascinating time for a whole bunch of reasons. But the points you were making there were very, very consistent with what you're saying now, and that's a very neat thing to see. A politician who doesn't change his position over years, locking into those principles is really quite important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tim, we've been instrumental in talking with some of the CPC leaders when they had the leadership campaign going on, and we talked with some of the Green leaders as well too about their vision of gun control reform, and so we have this kind of a canned survey, and I can send that to you later. But I thought maybe we'd talk to some of the key points in there, like namely the first one that we had in our survey says, "Do you support the non-victims, non-violent firearms offenses of the criminal code being taken out of the legislation?"
Yeah, absolutely. That's right in our platform. So I think it's section 91 and 92, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. That's right. I'm not going to get into the other ones of these, but one that's really near and dear to my heart is the whole deal about, self-defense, right? I mean, we have an inalienable right, as far as I'm concerned, as libertarians. We understand personal sovereignty, that, and if somebody, threatens me with, mortal harm and everything else, I should be able to defend myself, not with a tool of choosing, by the state, but with whatever I need to do to repel the attack and to save myself and my family. What do you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I did a video on this. People watching can go to YouTube and type in the search Tim Moen, shoot, shovel, shut up, and see the video I did on this. This was right around the time that I'm trying to remember the fellow's name. It was down by Okotoks. He was I think he winged a burglar that was on his property or something like that, and was being charged. And this was just another in the long line of Canadians who had defended themselves from aggression, defended their family, defended their homes, and then faced aggression from the state and prosecution from the state for the thing. It's embarrassing. I can't remember the fellow's name now in Ontario who shot over. Ian Thomas. Yeah. Thompson. Yeah. Yep. And, there's just a long line of things. I list a bunch of cases in there because I did a bit of research for that video, and it was just one thing after. There was another guy who shot over the head of some people that were pulling fish out of his fish pond. And, this guy was 67 years old. I think he had one traffic ticket in his life. That his total run-in with law enforcement in this guy's life. Grandfather, upstanding citizen, shot over these guys' heads, scared them off. And he spent, I think, close to $250,000 defending himself. And I think he ended up getting a year probation and a fine or something like that. It was utterly criminal what our government does to people who are defending themselves.
And what you're talking about really, Tim, is that these laws are bad laws, not good laws, right?
Correct.
Exactly. Like in the legal sense of the term, and of course the police are forced to enforce bad laws, right? And of course, you get even more tension between the public and the government security forces. So it's a spiraling thing. So it's so important that these standing bad laws that are causing this conflict and this angst in our society, they be reviewed and ultimately be revealed and replaced with something that actually does what it's supposed to and protect us.
Right. I would prefer even a common law system where we have kind of decentralized courts and disputes are brought before a justice that is interested in discovering justice, right? Right now we have a system of justice in Canada that's legislative. It's top down. And what a judge's job is to do is look at what the sacred writing is that a politician scribbled on the script and to determine whether your behavior lined up with that or not. And they call that justice. Well, common law, they look at past precedent. They try to discover the principles, and that this is where these maxims come out, and principles like use as much force as necessary, not more, right? If someone is an immediate threat, you can use as much force as necessary to repel it. The guy's running away, you probably shouldn't shoot him in the back. So they develop these principles and try to apply the context of that specific case to the principles that have a long history of being tested, almost like a scientific discovery, and getting refined over time. That's how law should work to me. It shouldn't be this top-down legislative authority of, by fiat kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's funny you said that, because that's the way it was designed to be in the first place. I mean, Canada is a common law country, right?
No,
but
I got to jump in on that, Charlie. I was just going to point out that Canada is a conglomeration of two competing types of law. We have the British common law, and we have the French civil law style. It started off as a custom of Paris and it was modified at the time of Confederation. But what we have is a philosophy of writing everything down, which comes from the French side, and we have the other thing of treating by precedent, the common law, and those are in collision in our all aspects of our legal system, and it's been push and pull one way or another, along with the whole thing of constitutions versus parliament, which has more authority. But we don't want to get into that, because that's a whole treatise that we could talk about for another couple of weeks, let alone an hour. But we are coming to the close of our show anyway, and I just wanted to give Tim the last word on where he sees the next federal election going. What do you think is going to happen, and when? What's your call on what Trudeau's going to do, and how long is this COVID stuff going to be going on for?
Right. Well, I think he's going to, I have a feeling he's going to ride out his term as long as he can. It seems like he's got a lot of agendas he wants to push through, between the Great Reset and grabbing all their guns and all these things. He's got a lot of work to do. And so he's going to need as much time as possible to get that done. But we're gearing up for it being anytime. Really, it's a chaotic political scene right now, and it's impossible for me to predict what goes on in that guy's mind. So we need to be ready. We need to gear up. And, I don't know. I am not very optimistic in terms of our politics and our system working itself out and getting better. I think there's going to be some sort of things have to collapse, between the economic system pushing debt. I think Canada is now, Canadians are now I think it's over 5 trillion, since now COVID has added, I think, another trillion to the stack that Canadians owe in terms of unfunded liabilities at all levels of government. And that amounts to, I think, over $300,000 per taxpayer that we're on the hook for as Canadians in terms of debt that's been borne in our name. Now that is unsustainable. And of course, Trudeau knows this, and this is why they're talking about the Great Reset. And of course, the Great Reset is probably not going to be end the central banks and unregulated free markets and free market and money and all the things that us libertarians would like. It's going to be the exact opposite of that. It's going to be highly centralized control and distribution of property and resources to people, aka communism. They're going to use more flowery language than that, because there's a few brand issues with the word communism, but it will be that. And so we have to be ready for that. And I'm not sure how we stop it. I'm not sure that O'Toole is the man for the job. I'm not sure that mainstream politics can stop it. I don't think just getting power is going to be enough. I think we need to see a radical shift in culture. And so I'm not very bullish on the idea that things are going to improve through the political system. And so I'm doing what Albert J. Nock called in his essay, his 1930s essay, Isaiah's Job. I'm preaching to the remnant. I'm preaching to the people that my message resonates with. I'm here to encourage them, and these are the people that are going to pick up the pieces and have each other's back and band together and rebuild things. And hopefully there'll be something left to rebuild. And I know gunnies are going to be a big part of that, and I'm definitely going to cozy up to a gunny until I become one, for sure. So I appreciate your time and the opportunity to speak to your audience.
Well, that's great, Tim, and we're glad to have you. And just as a tip, I'd recommend you become a gunny sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no, I know. I do need to.
It's probably a prudent idea, but we're very glad to have you here to tell us about the Libertarians, and I appreciate you serving as sort of a moral conscience for the Canadian political system and adding something out there that should get a conversation going in our politicians in Ottawa, and if not the provincial legislatures as well. So thanks very much. All the best, and we'll be glad to be following what happens with the Libertarians, and we'll be also happy to provide you with any tips about your firearms policy that, if we think there are things that might get tweaked or anything, we'd be happy to be working with you on that.
Absolutely. And by the way, if you know of any instructors out in this area that can help me get a restricted license, I would be happy to have you send them away. I've been trying actually for the last 4 or 5 months, and everything seems to be shut down. But if anyone knows any
Sure.
avenues, I'd love to hear about them.
We'll get you to talk to Charlie or maybe Dwayne Gorniak or Gerald Lundgaard in Alberta. I'm sure that they can help set you up, and we'll get you moving that way.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Jim, thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of NFA Talk. Like and follow the NFA on social media and sign up to become a member.